Good morning, CrossWinds. Welcome back to the CrossWinds Church More Than Sunday podcast. We've got a very special podcast today that we're recording. In just a moment, you'll hear my conversation with Michael Mosby, who's an African-American part of a guy who's part of our church that has been part of CrossWinds for over 20 years. And we have a long dialogue about the events of last Monday with George Floyd. And we talk through what it looks like for us as a church to be a church of justice, a church that comes alongside people of color in our church who might be in fear right now, or have been in fear for a while, who might be dealing with all sorts of emotions that come out of this. And I think this is a really important conversation for you to listen to. One thing I feel like I want to say before we get started on this, before you listen to the actual podcast itself or the recording Michael and I did, we are not neutral on this issue. There's a lot of things we agree to disagree on as a church, especially when it comes to theology, even when it comes to politics. We're not neutral that everyone matters to God, that everyone is important. And to be very clear about that, that includes all of the people of color in our church and Black lives as well, right? Can we say that? I also think it's important to say we're not neutral on the fact that we don't think police brutality is a good thing. This is an injustice, and that we ought to speak out about that as the people of Jesus. Now, that's not to say that we don't believe that there are wonderful, wonderful police officers out there and a part of CrossWinds as well. And you'll hear Michael and I even at one point talk about a friend of his with the SFPD and their relationship. But I just feel like it is important for us to say that as a church, we're horrified by this. We are disgusted by what we've seen, as the rest of America as they watch the footage of that event. That we feel it's really important as the people of Jesus that we do something. About these kinds of injustices in our world. And you're gonna hear Michael and I talk about that. So I understand that sometimes events like this can become politicized. I'd ask you to set that aside and just listen to two people who are part of your church family, your brothers really in Christ, talking about what this looks like and where we go from here. All right, here's the podcast. CrossWinds, as we start off today's podcast, I'm here with Michael Mosby, who's a part of our CrossWinds family. Michael, how long have you been at CrossWinds now?
Wow, it's been 20 plus years. My first day was, I remember it well, was Father's Day, 1998.
Oh my goodness, man, 20 plus years. That's longer than me. So you you could be telling me about what these podcasts ought to be. Let me set up a little bit of our conversation. And just kind of reset the table with everyone as to what's gone on and leading to us having this today. And I'm grateful for you coming on and being a part of this, Michael. I'm going to talk for a minute. So as part of that, I'm sorry that we're not starting off our podcast with our normal banter. We felt like today was more important than to do our normal banter. So last Monday in Minneapolis, police were called to, I believe it was a grocery store. They had a report of a man who had supposedly attempted to use forged documents. I don't know what's true or not true about that, but according to the reports, when the officers approached George Floyd in his car, he seemed intoxicated. As he exited the car, he resisted arrest, they say. So the officers wrestled him to the ground. They placed him in handcuffs. Now, that up to that point, that sounds like a normal arrest procedure. However, what was followed was captured by a bystander on video. There's a 9-minute video that shows an officer placing his knee on the neck of George Floyd for several minutes, and in that position, with this knee on his neck, face down to the ground, George Floyd began to say, "I can't breathe." Repeated it over and over again. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I believe even was calling out for his mother in that. People who were bystanding are watching this happen. Um, uh, uh, Somebody says he's not even resisting arrest right now. Another person says you're stopping him from breathing right now. People are begging the officer to get off him. After about 5 minutes, George Floyd stops moving and appears unconscious. People in the crowd who have gathered at this point start pleading for the officer to check his pulse. Um, the officer didn't lift his knee until medical personnel arrive and carry him to an ambulance. George Floyd died at the hospital. At a Tuesday morning press conference, the Minneapolis mayor just speaks real bluntly. Here's the words of the mayor. This officer failed in the most basic human sense. George Floyd should not have died, and apologized to the family and the black community in Minneapolis. And then the mayor went on to say, being black in America should not be a death sentence. What we saw is horrible, completely and utterly messed up. And then by that evening, the police department had terminated all 4 officers who were involved in the incident. And I believe at least one of those officers right now is being charged. Uh, uh, I don't know what he's being charged with, Michael. Do you know if he's being charged with murder or
Yeah, he's being charged with third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter.
uh, you hear this story, and I just know that this is one of many, 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 many stories like it. And if we were to go back through the headlines uh, over the years, we could just read off name after name. I think Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Freddie Gray, Philando Castile, uh, Ahmaud Arbery. This is one of many, and there are thousands of other stories of what feels like systemic injustice. I shouldn't just say feels like, but is, and bias and bigotry. And I wanted to do a podcast today with Michael where we could talk about this and talk about how the church should be responding to injustice like this. And so Michael was kind enough to be willing to come on and have this conversation with us. As you heard a moment ago, Michael's been a part of CrossWinds for over 20 years. He's been a part of our drama team. You've seen him up front. In fact, recently in January, we were in a series where we talked through what it looks like for us as a church to do a number of things in terms of what it means to be people of justice. And as we talked about it, we listened to some stories, and we had a Sunday where Michael was one of the people up in an interview on stage, just kind of sharing a little bit of his story of what it's been for him to be a black man in America and in the Bay Area. And so, Michael, thanks for joining. I'm grateful that you're here.
Thanks, Chris. And, if it's okay with folks, I just really like to take a minute. Because Chris, as you were recounting that, you know, I'm still holding back the tears from this. You
Yeah.
know, in that moment, George Flood is my brother,
Hmm.
and I feel that. And as a self-confessed mama's boy, having that brother cry out for his mother, his dead mother, by the way, she's not alive,
Mm.
crying out for his mother in that moment, really hits home. And,
Yeah.
and for folks that are listening, if his words were dear God in that moment, I
Yeah.
think maybe that might bring it home, a bit for us.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just want to just take just half a second to just kind of to honor this brother and what his passing has meant.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm grateful that you'd have us do that. Um, Michael, so we've had a chance to hear from you, like I said back in January, a little bit of your story, and uh, a lot of parts of that jump out to me. Specifically, I remember you telling us about the conversation with your dad, and I believe it was you uh, uh, doing something that was a little bit activist oriented, if I recall, in high school, right?
Yeah,
Was that what happened? And
yeah,
I think your dad got on your case about it,
he did.
and and the reason was, if I recall, because he was afraid for your safety out of
Yeah.
that.
And Chris, the way my father, but and by the way, I had written an article for the school newspaper. I went to a school that's predominantly white,
That's
and
right. Yeah,
I wrote an article to the school newspaper about the overt prejudice in the school. Didn't expect it to be published, and it got published, and took it home to my dad, very proud of my young black activist
yeah, yeah,
action.
yeah.
And my dad called me militant.
That's right. That's right.
Um, and it wasn't until years later when I was adult, because that was a kind of a wound for me when when I was in high school. And as an adult, I went back and I said, Dad, this really hurt me. I was very proud of this, and I brought it to you, and I thought, as my parent, you'd be proud of me doing this. And he says, Son, you don't understand.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, being a black man, if you raised your head above the crowd,
Mm.
it got chopped off.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
said, and I had you there in that school for you to get a good education. And he goes, and the son I loved, I saw him raise his head above the crowd, and I
Mm.
was afraid they were just going to chop it off.
Mm.
So that was just to let you know the conversation that happened there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you in a moment like this, all these years later, you've got to feel like not just right now in this podcast, but at work and in your day to day, you're raising your head above the crowd. The fear that comes with that.
Um, there isn't really a fear that comes with it. There's more of a realization. As a black man, when we walk into a situation throughout life, and especially at work, we tend to show up with happy faces. Um, we're challenged to be strong because most of the time we walk into a situation where we know that we're held to a different standard.
Hmm.
And so to be able to survive and live in that, we have developed um, talents and mechanisms to appear better. And
Yeah.
so now it's a state of, yes, raising your head, trying to raise your head above the crowd, because there's a feeling that you have to work twice as hard
Hmm.
to get the same amount of treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's I'll tell you, it's tiring. And to me personally, I think a lot of what we're seeing now,
Hmm.
and a lot of what am hearing from my black friends, is we're tired. We're sick and tired of being sick and tired. As Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is what they mean, that it's a
Hmm.
daily
Yeah.
struggle, and it's part of our daily lives to
Yeah.
have this experience.
Yeah. Um, I hear you say that, and I'm sorry for that. I can't imagine what it must be like to daily feel like this is a conversation you've got to have, a reality you've got to live in, um, a shoulder you've got to look over. Uh, I would think there's fear that comes with that, and anger that comes with that, Michael, and a deep sadness and a breaking of your heart that's got to come with that. And not just for you, but for your kids and your family. I would think that this is a constant.
Yeah, I'll tell you, my brother. But as a person of color, you can't stay there
Okay.
because you just can't live. You can't live life that way, even though that may be the reality.
Yeah.
And if you look back, I mean, this is hundreds of years of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And most black folk realize that we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us.
Hmm.
And one of the lessons that we learned um, is that hope overcomes. Plug into hope. There's the reality of life,
Yeah.
and then there's hope.
Yeah.
And most of us go to the place of hope,
Yeah.
um, because that's what not only were we taught, that was the belief of our
Yeah.
ancestors.
Yeah.
The belief. And Chris, I had an experience a couple years ago where I visited the plantation where my ancestors were slaves.
Oh my gosh.
And the docent was nice enough because my last name is the last name of the slave owner. And the docent was nice enough to go, "Oh my gosh, you're a Mosby?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." And so she took me back to the slave quarters that are not part of, 'cause it's a museum now. It's
Yeah.
a heritage museum. And she took
Yeah.
me to the slave quarters that they don't show anyone else.
Oh wow.
And again, I'm fighting back tears at the moment to try to speak coherently here.
Okay. Yeah.
I had a moment of surrealism because what I thought was, here I am in this moment. I have a corporate card in my wallet that I could go out and kind of do just about anything I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And the reason that I have this gift is because of the hope of the people that lived in this shanty and worked in these fields and may not have had hope for themselves, but had hope for those
Mm.
that would follow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is real about understanding that we're standing on the shoulders of those that came before.
Yeah.
And most black parents, the most important thing for them is to push their children forward because they understand this concept.
I will tell you, just hearing that story gives me hope in this because one of the things I'm about to ask you is how do we stop this from happening? And then we're going to shift into what does it look like for the church in this? But I I have often lost hope that we're going to stop this from happening um, because there just continues to be person after person, and it just seems so insurmountable. And as I hear you say that, I think, you know, it may not stop happening tomorrow, but for your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids, you can hold out hope that this is a fight worth fighting and that at some point this will stop for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key point. To be real with you,
Yeah.
as black people, we've seen this movie before.
Yeah.
You, the first thought that came to my mind when I saw the recording of Brother George, I thought of Rodney King.
Yeah.
I went back to Rodney King back in '92 when I saw that. And as a black man, there have been things in the history within my lifetime that in my head I'm like, this has got to be the thing.
Right. This will be
This
the
is
last one.
this has
This will
got to be
change
the
everything.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes, that make people realize that this is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but we've had many of those moments since
Yeah.
Rodney King.
Yeah.
And I think part of where we find ourselves today is we had a series of these things happen.
Yeah.
Ahmaud Arbery happens, Breonna Taylor happens, Christian Cooper happens. He's the one in Central Park
Mm-hmm.
where the police was called on him
Mm-hmm.
by a woman who said, "I'm going to tell the cops that there's an African American here, man here threatening my life." And we
Yeah.
follow that with George Floyd. Um, and so I can tell you for myself and for a lot of other black people I've spoken to, this is just a straw that finally broke the camel's back. And I think we're seeing that right now.
Yeah.
And so I hope
Yeah.
this is the one.
Right. Right.
This is the one
Yeah.
that brings us to this point of wanting to actually change things. And
Yeah.
but I also have to be real and tell you, I've seen this movie before.
Right. Right. The just so everybody knows in this, we've not like scripted out everything we're going to talk about in all of this. And
Yeah,
I mean, I think we have a loose to say an outline is even putting it mildly.
yeah,
In fact, I think we've got a way to close, but
yeah,
otherwise, we're just kind of talking here, and I mean, Michael, so I don't know the answers to this, and I'll just say I don't speak for all white people. I'm sure Michael would feel he doesn't speak for all black people. Neither of us speak for the government. Neither of us speak for the
yeah.
police. We're just guys who are talking about this. But do you, why do you think it hasn't? And I don't want to put the pressure on you to have to know the
Yeah.
answer to this, but do you have any thoughts as to why it didn't stop a year ago or 2 years ago when everyone was outraged over injustice?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts, but I'm not going to share all of them with you.
Okay.
Um, um, I would say that there is, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
systemic oppression in our country
Mm-hmm.
that's been there for hundreds of years. And it's going to be tough to change that,
Yeah.
right? Because we're talking about changing a system, which by the way starts with changing people's hearts. So that's where I'm hoping we start.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's changing a system um, and a mindset that's been in place for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And so
so go ahead.
I was going to say, and so if you listen to most folks who were speaking about this in the past couple days, what you're really hearing is the message of start local,
Yeah.
understand what's going on in your community, and does it align with the way you think things should be. Use your voice, use the power of your vote,
Mm-hmm.
um, be aware what's going on and who your local leaders are.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really great place to start for
Yeah.
consideration.
Yeah. I one of my frustrations in this whole dialogue, we were just having it yesterday as a pastoral staff. One of my frustrations is we often don't get very practical. We say things like we've got to love, we've got to be good, we have to fight for injustice. But
Yeah,
that equates to nothing without application. Like what does it look
yeah,
like? So you just mentioned a
yeah,
few. Get to know your city and county leaders. Like start to understand what's happening on your local level. I mean, get even more specific than that. What does it look like to start local, Michael?
yeah, yeah. I think what it looks like is
Hmm.
who are your local leaders?
Yeah,
What do they stand for? And it's not particularly what is their platform.
yeah,
What have you seen them do or not do?
yeah, yeah.
Um, Personally, it drives me a little nuts when I see people run unopposed
Mm.
because I think conversation and difference of opinion helps us to learn
Find out.
together.
Yeah, yeah. It helps us find out what somebody's about.
Yep,
Yeah, yeah,
so I would say specifically be more active in that way, and
yeah,
well, maybe the call to action I'm going to make in this at some point in time, but it
yeah,
starts with being educated
yeah,
and educating yourself.
yeah, yeah. I appreciate that. I think that's important. I'm afraid we leave it at education.
Yeah,
And I think one of the other things we often say is we need to listen. Like that service we did back in January where we heard your story.
yeah,
Um, that's important. I'm afraid we leave it at listening.
yeah.
My
Well,
fear
and you,
is we sit and do this podcast, people listen and go, okay, well that was great. And next time this happens, I'll do it again. But it does not feel like enough to me
Mhm,
to think that this is going to move the needle.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting to let people know. I mean, the way this podcast came about was I saw the Crosswinds post on Facebook over the weekend
Yeah.
um, about being hopeful and pastors being available to pray for you.
Yeah.
And I looked at that. I'm like, I really appreciate that. And I still got on my phone and I
Yeah.
texted Aaron, and I'm like, all right, brother, what are we doing?
Right, right,
I
right.
appreciate the post.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you for the post. And what are we doing?
yeah,
So I'm right there with you. And so it's culminated. One of the things it's
yeah.
culminated in is this podcast we're having right now.
So that's a good shift as we
Yeah.
as we start to think about the church a little bit. Um, so I would think obviously what's got to be heartbreaking for you in all of this is, and really any person of color, is what it is to be treated differently, to be afraid of something happening to you, your family, any of this. I think another area of heartbreak has got to be what feels like the silence of the church. Um, I think the church, Big C, maybe the church Crosswinds. Um, what does it look like for churches to
Mm.
speak into this and to have a voice in this and to respond in this? I will tell you, I have no control over our social media accounts. Those are not my things. But frankly, not a fan of social media because it feels trite to me. Like in general, when something tragic happens, when our response is, I'm going to post a thing, that does not feel like the justice that Jesus is calling us to. No, by the way, I love our social media team and our staff. So thank you for posting those things. I think it's wonderful. I just personally, that's not how I'm going to use my voice. So what more besides people tweeting is going to be the thing that you, as a person of color, need to see and hear from the church you've been a part of for 20 plus years?
Yeah. Great question, and if you can bear with me because this may be a little bit of a lengthy answer,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah, go for it.
but I hope that's okay.
Yeah,
That I, there's a call to, for me. There's a call to action
yeah.
here. There is a call to action, and the call to action for me and a lot of other Black folk um, is to be an ally and to ally. And
Hmm.
so, like, if you think about that word ally, that really means to combine or unite for mutual benefit.
Yeah,
So this is really the verb, the action, the call to action to ally. Um, and there is a concept called allyship, which people may or may not be familiar with. But really,
and you gave me
oh,
that
go for
word
it.
yesterday,
Yeah,
and I was like, "Oh, I
yeah,
like. Tell me about this allyship."
yeah.
So go
So
explain it.
you got it. So allyship in itself, again, is this call to action, but it's very specific. So it's a call to action to whom? It's a call to action for those who have privilege and power.
Mm,
And I know that word privilege gets
yeah,
thrown around. And I do want to take a moment just to say, look, when we're talking about privilege here, we're not saying the wealthy and
yeah,
leaving it there. It's
yeah.
not what that means.
Or the person who's never had any hard knocks in life.
Right, right. But it refers to societal privilege that white people tend to have and non-whites don't. Um, and so allyship is a call to action for those who have the privilege and power. So to be very specific, allyship is not a call to action for me specifically in this moment, although I can be a great ally as well, and I can tell you a story about that. But it is a call to action. Um, the other part of it is to understand that this is a continuous process.
Hmm.
And so it's important to me that not only does we as a church respond in this moment, but we continue to respond and continue in this struggle.
Yeah.
And then when you think of allyship, there are three parts to it, for me, I know when I think of things in threes, it's just a little bit easier to remember,
You're a
right?
pastor and you didn't even know.
See, there you go. The first is to learn, and it's to learn about the experience of people who are marginalized.
Hmm.
Now, let me tell you what the learning is not. And I mention this is because I have received um, requests from um, my white friends on this. When they were asking me, they say, "Hey, Michael, teach me."
Yeah.
And so, folks, this learning is not about me teaching you. It's not about
Hmm.
your black friend teaching you. Now, don't get me wrong. We certainly appreciate the courage to come forward and ask for this. So
Hmm.
this isn't a judgment in that space.
Yeah.
But this is learning about the experiences.
Hmm.
This is asking about the experiences. Chris, this is what you and I have been doing at the first part of this podcast, asking
Yeah.
about the experiences. So the learning part of this is the learning about the experience. And you know what that really means? Really means get close.
Hmm.
There's a concept that's called get proximate,
Yeah.
which means the closer you are to something,
Yeah.
the more it has a tendency to have an impact on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in this part of learning the experiences is get close.
Yeah.
Get close to folks of color and just ask them about their experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's the learn. And then the
Let me
sec
let
go
me.
for it.
Do you mind if I? But you won't forget what you're
Yeah,
going to say, right?
I'm not going to forget what I'm going to say. Yeah.
Okay. So just as a white guy who would want to learn, I want to be wise about that. I feel like I might have heard two things there, and I want to make sure I don't screw that up. All right. You you're you mentioned, you're okay with your white friends calling you like teach me, but at the same time, that's not what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about learning from friendship, and what happens is you self-reveal in a friendship. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you're getting that right.
It is not about finding the one black person and calling them and being like, it's time for me to be woke. So
Yeah,
do you mind downloading everything to me? It's
yeah.
about building a relationship, and and as you do in any relationship,
Yes,
hearing someone's story over the course of time. Am
yes.
I getting that right?
You're getting that right.
Okay, okay.
And the other piece, Chris, is again that challenge to get close,
Yeah, yeah, right. And get
get
close.
proximate. So again, it doesn't mean going and buying a book by a black author and reading it. You
Yeah,
can certainly do that,
yeah, yeah,
but it is also about getting close and being
yeah.
proximate.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. What's your second
No
one?
worries. So the second one is to empathize.
Okay, okay.
So it's empathizing with their struggle and their challenges,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And so, when we show empathy, we're showing understanding and we're sharing the feelings.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's why the learning part is so important to learn from the experience. And it's then to empathize,
yeah,
get an understanding of those feelings and share in
yeah,
them.
yeah,
Um, and that's a really important step to do. You can't know what it is to be black.
yeah,
But if I share an experience with you, I bet you can go, oh, I know that feeling because it happened to me in this way.
yeah, yeah.
Now, there is, just ironically, Chris, a great conversation. You and I were talking a bit about it last night. Out of the blue, I received a text message from a friend of mine who is a member of the SFPD. And he happens to be fairly young. He's only 28
Mm-hmm.
and he's white.
Okay.
And he sent me a text and he goes, Michael, can we talk? I'm just confused.
Mm,
And so I'm like, of course we can talk. Um, so we got on a call like this and we were talking about. He goes, I'm confused about why when I walk out in my uniform I get such hatred.
uh,
And I go, okay, great question. Thanks for being courageous enough to come to your black friend
mm,
and be so transparent and authentic with this question.
yeah,
And so I said, so you got to understand the roots of the trigger of
yeah.
white officers on black men. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, because there's a lot of roots here that go back hundreds of years. And so I say, when I told him about it, not only the experience of black folk, but my experience in this, my personal experiences in this, he was able to learn in that moment and then empathize. And he goes, oh, I get it more.
Yeah,
I understand that more.
yeah.
And I'll tell you one other thing in this space about empathizing. I've also seen and sometimes have gotten personally um, this thing about, wait, what do you mean Black Lives Matter? Don't all lives matter,
Right.
right? And the answer is, of course, all lives matter.
That's implied.
That is implied.
Yeah.
But there's something that goes along with that, um, because I've also heard from folks around me about, well, Michael, I don't understand this because I don't see color. I'm colorblind.
Mm-hmm.
And my response is, unfortunately, you are. Um, as a black man, I'm not asking you to be colorblind. I'm asking you to see color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because when you're colorblind, my fear is you don't see me at all.
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
removes you from any type of responsibility. That
Yeah.
removes you from getting close and getting proximate.
Or empathy. It removes
Or,
you from
or,
empathy. You
or
can't
empathy, right?
empathize with me if you don't
Which is why
know.
you
Yeah.
don't know me, and that's why
Yeah.
we're talking about here in this
Yeah. Yeah.
empathize space.
Yeah.
And so to bring it back around to the Black Lives Matter, just to understand where this is coming from, that's what this is saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is saying, of course, all lives matter, but all lives won't matter until Black Lives matter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right now, there's a question about whether Black Lives matter.
Yeah.
And so this ability to show empathy
Hmm. Hmm.
it is crucial in understanding that.
I read an article yesterday. It was fascinating. Somebody was talking about the phrase Black Lives Matter and whether it's okay for people to say, well, wait a second, all lives matter. And they said what is also implied is at the end of Black Lives Matter is a word that should be there that people are if they put it after they'll go, ah, I get it, which is the word too, TOO.
Mm.
Black Lives Matter too is really what that's saying. And when someone says, well, no, 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 all lives matter, it's almost as if they're denying the two part of that thing. So
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
What's your third one?
So the third one, and this is now. So the first two
Yeah.
are action steps. This one is the one um, that can tend to trip people up, and
Yeah.
this is the build build relationships,
Mm-hmm.
build
Mm-hmm.
it. Um, you can learn to empathize in the moment. The building represents something longer term.
Mm.
The building represents a deeper commitment.
Yeah.
Um, and so to me, here's now, this real action step. I don't know what it is for folks, but in anyone I've been talking to the last few days, I'm like, I'll talk about allyship, and then it's like I'm challenging you to now build.
Mm-hmm.
You can figure out your own way. We can talk about ways to do that,
Yeah.
but it is to build. So an allyship for the church, again, learn, empathize, and build, and how do we embody that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's good, man. If you're open to it, I'd love to have you come back on and do another podcast just on empathy alone.
Yeah.
I think there's so many things right there that we don't understand, and here's where I think we get tripped up a lot. Um, I So what I do with my friends is argue, right? You sit down over a beer and you debate things and you talk
Yeah.
about things and you disagree and you so inevitably the closer I get to you, the more comfortable I am um, poking holes and us sitting there having that kind of conversation. Well, empathy, it's kind of the opposite of that in some degree. It's just listening and saying, I just want to understand your perspective on this. And
Yeah.
I wanna, as close as I can, feel it with you.
Yeah.
It's weeping with those who weep, right? This
Yeah.
very scriptural thing. And oftentimes I think what happens, especially when it comes to matters of race, we we trade empathy for, well, hold on a second, what about this, right?
Hmm.
Um, uh, I, Point being, we could do a whole podcast. I think it would be
Yeah.
fascinating to talk about that.
Well, Chris, let me tell you one other thing
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that it is underneath all of this
yeah,
that I'm glad you brought it up because it gives me the space to talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
When you look at these steps, these three steps,
yeah,
they're also the steps for building trust,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Right, right.
And so another thing that they're talking about underneath is how do we build trust
Mm-hmm.
with one another?
Yeah, yeah. That's good. I think you're right. These are the things you do in any normal relationship. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Um, let me shift a little bit in the allyship conversation. I think it's
yeah.
worth it. And by the way, everyone listening, this is about 20 minutes longer already than our normal podcast. So I won't apologize. I think it's well worth it and hopefully valuable for everybody. But again, I had asked, it's got to be so hard for you to see the church be silent on this issue, for people of color to see the church be silent. Let me just speak to God's heart on that for a second, and then maybe we can jump back into practicals. Um,
Sure.
so there are examples after examples in Scripture of God calling us to stand up for righteousness and justice. I want to read these. When we say this should matter as a church, here's Psalm 82:3. It says, God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. Put that in air quotes. How long will you defend the unjust? This is God speaking. How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. So this is God rendering judgment on his people for not upholding the cause of the oppressed. You go over to Isaiah 117. learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. You go to Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what's the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. By the way, act justly, not tweet justice. That there's more to it, or not to just listen. Luke 11:42. This is Jesus. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You neglect justice. So, this is obviously an issue very close to the heart of God. What does it look like for us to be a church of justice when it comes to these kinds of issues?
Yeah, I think the first step, I go back to the first step about allyship, which is to
Yeah.
learn,
Yes.
and that is we need to create space to
Yeah.
hear from one another,
Yeah. Yeah.
to learn from experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And quite frankly, I think we're also in a space where we need to feel.
mm,
And as you and I were chatting, I can't help being a part of this church family for 20 plus years to believe that if we made space for that,
yeah.
that there would be a number of folks in our family who were white giving me encouragement, speaking words of encouragement to me, and words of support, and being willing to
Yeah.
learn and
Yeah.
have a great conversation.
I one of the things that I did about man almost 4 years ago now. I have a friend who's a pastor of an African American church in Hayward, and we'd been in a small group together and gotten to know each other. And he was telling me that one of the things they did in their church from time to time is they'd hold these town hall meetings for the church where people could just come and share and speak and talk about their fears or what was going on. And they had held one. I believe it was November of 2016, out of the election and out of the presidential election. They just felt like, as a church, there was a lot of fear surrounding that. And I had said, "Hey, can I come? Do you mind?" I just This is fascinating to me as a church that, generally speaking, avoids politics and tries to kind of stay away from a lot of those conversations. I'd love to just come watch what you guys are doing in this. So Andrea and I went. I think Aaron Horner went with me. I think Danielle was on our staff at the time she went. I think Kim Bonilla might have gone too. I don't remember who all was there, but it was like there were like three or four of us white pastors in this large African American church. The only people in the room that were white listening to this town hall. Um, they asked me to get up and pray at the end, which is like, you know, the most on the spot moment in that setting, compared to our more, as much as you might not think we're formal. Let me say, compared to my friend's African American church, we're formal. And uh, anyway, I left it and I thought, oh, while we may not have time on Sunday morning to always talk through our fears and politics and all these other things, I wonder what it would look like for us to host um, town hall moments like this for our church, and for people to be able to come to that from our congregation and just speak their thoughts, their fears, their emotions, and listen to each other in that kind of
Yeah,
setting. I don't know. What do you think of that idea? Worth it?
I think that's an awesome idea. Yes, I think it's worth it. Um, let me say it more strongly. We should do it. How about that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
one of the things that we've talked about and that we were kind of wanting to lead up to with this, we have been talking about right now hosting kind of like a virtual version of that, a Zoom call that would be open to anybody and everybody, where we could just kind of talk through what action looks like for a church, what allyship looks like for a church in something like this. And we've asked Aaron Horner to host and be a part of that. And Michael, I think you've expressed a willingness to be a part of that too.
Absolutely.
So let this be the announcement that we're going to be doing something like that soon, and keep your eyes out for it. Hopefully, we'll have a date, and we'll even announce it on Sunday uh, as part of our online service. But I think it would be wise for anybody who's interested, even if you're not interested, to go to that and listen and be a part of that conversation and watch that, especially if it's on Zoom. Couldn't be easier to go and do that. Um, you can hang in the background if you really need to,
Yeah.
and just kind of be a part of that.
And Chris, I I think it's a God thing because I think about what you just preach about on Sunday, the
I can't
importance of God.
remember what I preached about on
I'm
Sunday.
sure, huh? Because you right? The importance of
Oh,
gathering.
gathering. Yes, right,
The
right, right.
importance of gathering,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I'm like, look at my brother be prophetic and not even know it.
There you go. There you go, man. Yeah. Well, that's I think that's a first step we can take in allyship is we can start to have conversations with the people of color in our church and start to ask them what it looks like for us to show solidarity, what it means to be their brothers and sisters at this time, and rather than a number of people like myself going, here's what I think you need right now, Michael. Um, I'd love to hear from the people in our church who are in the middle of this uh, next level of emotional stuff that comes with it. Tell us what they need
Yeah,
from us. So, yeah.
yeah.
All right, man. Um, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you'd come on and share with us, Michael. I appreciate it. I know it's hard to talk about. I know you have been talking about this nonstop. We spoke last night for a few minutes, and your whole day had been this topic. It seems in one way or another. And here we are recording at 8:30 in the morning, and here's another day where you begin with this. Um, I, at the same time, I think that your words about hope, they have the ability to challenge us to be people of hope and to not have to wait generations for the needle to move. And I hope that this can make a difference for our community and our church and what it looks like to be people of justice. So I'm grateful for you coming on.
Thank you, brother. I'm grateful to be a part of a church that makes time for this and gives this importance and to give it voice.
Yeah, of course. And let's keep giving it voice, and we'll keep figuring out ways out of this Zoom thing we've got coming up. What else we need to be doing. So, all right. Thanks, buddy. I
Awesome.
love you, and I'm glad you're part of Crosswinds.
Love you right back.